Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in today's video we are going to be doing a past paper, and I'll be doing the macroeconomics past paper test 2 semester 1. The date is 23rd of May 2023. Okay, so the first question says M1 is defined as, the first option says notes and coins held by commercial banks. Remember what M1 includes. M1 includes currency and cash deposits. But what is currency? Currency includes notes and cash deposits that are in circulation but not held by the commercial bank. So the correct answer for this would be not B. So A says notes and coins held by commercial banks. That's wrong. They need to be in circulation. B says notes and coins held by the public. That's partially correct. We also need to add the demand deposits, right? So C would be the correct answer. Notes and coins in circulation and demand deposits. D is false because notes, they said notes and coins in circulation. Okay, that's right. Demand deposits, that's right. And long-term deposits, that's false. Once we add long-term deposits, we need to be on M3. So in the test, if they said M1, it needs to be notes and coins in circulation and demand deposits, basically your currency and your demand deposits. M2 needs to be M1 plus short and medium term deposits. M3 needs to be M2 plus long term deposits, right? So the correct answer would be C. So that is what our correct answer is, C. Number 2 says refer to the table below that shows the assets and liabilities of SEF Bank to answer the questions that follow. So we have asset sides, liabilities, and stockholders' equity. And they say, what is SEF's bank required reserve ratio if the bank has 15 billion in excess reserves? So they are asking me what the reserve requirement ratio is, right? And the reserve requirement ratio, remember why there's a required reserve ratio. You need to put a certain amount with the South African Reserve Bank whenever people give you money, whenever people deposit money, so that whenever they want to withdraw the money and you don't have it in your commercial bank, then you can go to the South African Reserve Bank and ask for it. So the reason why we have reserves is because we received deposits, right? It's so we can meet our demand deposits. So there are two things that are going to affect the required reserve ratio. It's going to be the amount of reserves that I need to keep and the demand deposits that I have. However, I need to take into account the fact that in this question, I have 15 billion of excess reserves, right? So meaning that this year, I was required to keep 30,000. However, last year, I was left with 15,000 as my reserves, right? So I'm required to keep 30,000. However, I have 15,000, meaning that I already have 15,000. So I need to give SARS 15,000. However, I need this in percentage form. So meaning that I need to take the 15,000, right, that I need to give to SARP over 150,000, right, the demand deposits, because remember the reason why I have the required reserve ratio is because I need to meet the demand deposits. So it's gonna be what you're gonna give them, the 15 billion over the 150,000 times 100, and that gives you 10%. So the correct answer is B. Then we go on to number 3. Number 3 says, based on our understanding of consumptions and savings, we know that the marginal propensity to consume and the marginal propensity to save must be equal to 1, right? So when you sum them together, they must give you 1. So remember, where does your income go? Your income, you can either consume it or save it. So when I say the marginal propensity to consume, I mean change in C over change in YD, right? And then when I say marginal propensity to save, I'm saying change in savings over change in YD. So when I add these two together, they are going to give me 1 because the sum of this and this is my income. So they must sum up to exactly 1. So the correct answer there is C. Okay, and then question 4 says, consider the specifications of money demand being M is equal to V times P times Y. Suppose the actual money supply is M star, which is not equal to M, meaning I'm not at equilibrium, right? Because when I'm at equilibrium, the actual money supply should be equal to the money that I have, right? So according to the money neutrality principle, that is the quantity of money theory, the variable that would adjust to achieve equilibrium is. So to achieve equilibrium, where do you achieve equilibrium when we're talking about money supply? You achieve equilibrium when you are at the long term, right? When you are in the long run. And in the long run, the velocity, which is our V in this case, is 0. M is the money, P is the price, Y is real GDP. So in the long run, the price is actually going to change in order to match the money supply as well as the actual money supply and the money that you have. So what is going to change here is my C. So just know that whenever you're talking about the money neutrality principle, or when you're talking about the quantity of money theory, what changes in the long run is P, and you should also know that the velocity is V. So the Y never changes, the M star never changes. Just know, because the question might come and say, what is the velocity, right, of money in the long run? And you should know that it is actually equal to 0. And what changes in the long run is what is our price. So the answer that we have is C. Right? And then we go on to question 5. Question 5 says, as per the Keynesian model, an increase in interest rate leads to. So whenever we are talking about the Keynesian model, let me just explain. So we have two approaches, right? We have the Keynesian approach and we have the monetarist approach. So under the Keynesian approach, it says that we need government intervention, right? And how does the government intervene in the economy to stabilize prices? It can intervene in the economy through the monetary policy as well as the fiscal policy, right? And under the monetary policy, they can use the monetary instruments, which includes the repo rate, the cash reserve requirement rates, as well as open market transactions. And then under the fiscal policy, they may adjust taxes and government spending. So here they are talking about the Keynesian, and then under the monetary approach, it says that we do not need any government intervention, as that is what causes fluctuations in the economy. So in this question, they are talking about the Keynesian model, meaning that we are using the Keynesian approach, which says that the government needs to intervene into the economy to stabilize prices. And how does the government intervene? Through the fiscal policy and monetary policy. So in this question, they are talking about interest rates. Interest rates are part of the monetary policy, right? So think about it. If they are using the monetary policy and increasing interest rates, what's going to happen, or what had happened, right? Why do they increase interest rates? Okay, let me just go to another page to explain this concept. So we said that the government intervenes to stabilize prices. So basically, it means that we have inflation and the government wants to stabilize the prices, right? How do they do that? Monetary policy and fiscal policy. So whenever we are on the expansionary monetary policy, whenever the economy is doing well, basically, and they want to lessen that. So when there is too much demand, causing inflation, right? Demand pull inflation. They have to lessen the demand. So how do they lessen the demand? They are going to increase the interest rates, right? The South African Reserve Bank is going to increase the interest rates. And then when they increase the interest rates, what is going to happen? You're going to take less loans. So if you have less loans, there's going to be less money in circulation. And if you have less money in circulation, that means that you are going to decrease, right, your demand. So remember the aggregate expenditure model in the 45-degree line. And then we said that at this point, you have unplanned inventories. So here you are consuming more than the real GDP, and then here you are consuming less than the real GDP. So if they increased the interest rates and they wanted you to reduce your demand, it means that after they have increased the interest rates, you are going to be producing at an amount that is less than the real GDP, because that's their intention. There's too much demand, so they want to reduce the demand. How do they do that? They increase the interest rates, less money in circulation, and then you are going to have less demand than the real GDP. And whenever you have less demand than the real GDP, remember when we talked about the unplanned inventories. So here, because you are below, they are less. There's a reduction in your inventories. And then here, there's a reduction in the inventories, and then here there's an increase in inventories. So meaning that if they had to increase the interest rates, it would increase the unplanned inventories. So C. So the correct answer is C. So question 5, C. So to answer this question, you'd have to understand what the Keynesian approach says, right? And understand the two policies, fiscal, monetary. And then when they are talking about interest rates, they are talking about the monetary policy. If they're using the monetary policy and they're increasing the interest rates, it means that they want to decrease demand. So meaning that the aggregate expenditure is going to be lower than the real GDP. And when you are consuming less than the real GDP, it means that your warehouse, the stock on your warehouse is actually going to increase. So that's why the answer is an increase in unplanned inventories, C. Then question 6 says, you are given the following information. Given autonomous spending, MPC, government expenditure, exports, imports, investment expenditure, and autonomous tax. And they ask you for the equilibrium expenditure. So the equilibrium expenditure occurs where my Y, my real GDP, is equal to my aggregate expenditure. So you'd have to equate the two and then say Y is equal to, what is aggregate expenditure equal to? It's real GDP, right? So it's going to be C plus I plus G plus X minus M. However, what is consumption made up of? Consumption is made up of autonomous consumption, which is consumption that is independent of your income. And then you're going to have the induced consumption, right? And it is dependent on income. So it's going to be dependent on your marginal propensity to consume, right? Your B, which is your slope. So it's going to be B times YD. But what is your YD? Your YD is your income minus your taxes. It's your real GDP minus your taxes, right? So I just broke down the C into this formula. And then plus government spending plus investment plus X minus M. And then you substitute into this formula. My A is my autonomous consumption, which is 200, plus my B, which is my slope, my marginal propensity to consume of 0.9. And then my Y is real GDP, which I don't know what it is, minus my taxation. Taxation is given into autonomous tax in this case, so minus my 50, plus my investments given as 100, plus my government expenditure of 150, plus my exports of 250, less my imports of 50. And then when you solve this whole thing, you will have 605, and then you're going to have 0.9, right, Y. And then on the other side, you're going to have Y. So it's going to be 1Y minus 0.9Y, which is going to give you 0.1Y is equal to 605. And then you divide by 0.1 and it gives you 6050. So if it so happens in the exam that you forget the formulas, break them down. Ask yourself, what is C made up of? C is made up of autonomous consumption and induced consumption. Because it's consumption, you're going to have the independent consumption and the consumption that is dependent on income. So the one that is independent, you write it on its own. And then the one that is dependent is affected by your slope. It's affected by your marginal propensity to consume, right? And then you do that and then you work it out, right? Based on this formula, the C plus I plus G plus X plus minus M. Then when you do that, you get that the Y is 6050 and the correct answer is C. Then question 7 says, which one of the following will cause a rightward shift in the aggregate demand? So remember what causes shifts in the aggregate demand. First of all, we have expectations. Secondly, we have the fiscal and the monetary policy. Thirdly, we have the world markets, right? So in this case, they are talking about, remember I said expectations, fiscal and monetary policy, and world markets. So here they are talking about a rightward shift. So they want an increase in demand. Let's look at the first option. The first option says expected increases in firms' profits. So those are expectations, so it could affect demand part. But how does it affect demand? If there was an increase in demand, and they are saying it was caused by an expected increase in firm profits, that would be correct. Because if you expect that your profits are going to increase, what's going to happen? You're going to invest more. And when you invest more, it's actually going to give you demand, right? It's going to increase your demand. So whenever there's an expectation in the profits, or whenever there's a rise in the expected inflation, you're going to consume more now than in the future. Remember, expected is not what you have now, it's not the actual, it's what's going to happen in the future. So when the expected one increases, you're going to increase demand now. So if the expected profits, if you are expecting that profits are going to increase in the future, you are actually going to increase your demand right now. And if you expect that your inflation is going to increase in the future, you're going to demand more now because goods are going to be expensive in the future. So the first option is correct. And then the second one says decreases in transfer payments. So transfer payments talk to the point of fiscal policy, and they are saying a decrease in transfer payments. What would a decrease in transfer payments mean? It would mean that the government would give out less transfer payments, right? And if they are giving out less transfer payments like social grants, what would happen? People would demand less because they would have less money. So that would not cause a rightward shift, but it would cause a leftward shift. And then they say a fall in the price level. Price level causes movements along the aggregate demand. It does not cause shifts. So the correct answer would be A, where we are saying only I. So the correct answer is A. Question 8 says, which of the following is most likely to cause cost push inflation? So remember, we have two types of inflation. We have cost push inflation, which is basically inflation due to an increase in the cost of production. And then we have demand pull inflation, where the demand is growing at a faster rate than real GDP, right? So where you have too much money in circulation. So here they are saying what would most likely cause cost push inflation. Remember, I said cost push inflation is caused by an increase in the cost of production. So we need to look for a reason that corresponds to an increase in the cost of production. So the first option says increase in fuel cost. Yes, that would increase the cost of production. So number 1 is correct. Number 2 says increase in consumption taxes. Consumption has to do with demand, doesn't have to do with production. So that answer is wrong. And then it says increase in imports of capital good. They didn't say there was an increase in the prices of imports of capital good. They just said you increased your imports of capital goods. So that would not be correct as well. If they had said an increase in the price of imported goods of capital goods, that would be correct because it's increasing your cost of production. However, here they didn't say anything about price. They just said we increased in imports of capital goods. So the correct answer would only be I, so A, right? So the correct answer is A. Then we go on to question 9. Question 9 says, refer to the following figure. Suppose that the short run aggregate supply is initially SA1. If the oil price doubles, right, the following will occur. So remember, we have the short run aggregate supply curve, and then we have the long run aggregate supply curve. What would cause a movement in the long run and the short run aggregate supply curve would be changes in potential GDP. And what would cause changes in potential GDP? It would be changes in your full employment, right? And then what would cause changes in your short run aggregate supply curve only and not the long run aggregate supply? It would be changes in the wage rates. And what affects the wage rates? Oh, wait, I'm saying it's what affects the short run aggregate supply would be changes in the wage rates or changes in the cost of production, right? So let us look at what would cause so the cost of production here is oil prices doubling. So if the prices of oil double, is supply going to increase or decrease? If the cost of production is increasing, they are going to decrease supply. So it would move from SAS1 to SAS1 to SAS0. So a shift to SAS0. So the correct answer is A. Number 10 says, suppose there is an increase in short-run aggregate supply. So they are saying there's an increase in the short-run aggregate supply with no change in the long-run aggregate supply. This situation could be a result of, so remember, if you are only changing the short-run aggregate supply but not the long-run aggregate supply, it is because of a change in the wage rates, right? A wage rate only changes the short run but not the long run, because remember, on the long run the price level changes at the same rate as the wage rates, so the real wage rate is going to be the same thing. So they are saying here, what would cause the SAS to change but the LAS to not change, right? It would be a change in the wage rates. So now I need to look for a reason that has to do with the wage rates and the prices of the cost of production, right? So looking for an increase in the short run. What would cause an increase in the short run? If there was a reduction in the cost of production, right? So anything that has to do with cost of production, I look at it. So I need to choose between C and D. C says an increase in the oil prices. That's going to reduce supply. And then a decrease in the price of oil, that's going to increase supply. So the correct answer is D. So what you guys need to remember is this. Short run aggregate supply is affected by the wage rates. It's affected by cost of production. So when they talk about a change in the short run aggregate supply and not, right, and not the long run aggregate supply, then it will be because of a wage rate change or a cost of production. But when they talk about a change in both the long run aggregate supply and the short run aggregate supply, they are then talking about changes in potential GDP, right? So in this case, I had to go look for a change in the cost of production. Then number 12 says the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. I'm given a long run aggregate supply and a short run aggregate supply, right? So they say the change reflected in the above diagram might be a result of. So in the diagram I saw, there was a decrease in short run aggregate supply, but no change in the long run aggregate supply. What did I say? If the long run aggregate supply stays constant, but there's a change in the short run aggregate supply, it is because of a wage rate change or a cost of production change. So now I need to look at those reasons. So if there was an increase, right, in supply, it means that there was a decrease in the cost of production. So the correct answer would be A, because it says a decrease in the money wage rates, right? So the answer would be A. The reason why B would not be a correct answer, because it says a decrease in the real wage rate. Real wage rate has to do with the long run aggregate supply. An increase in the money wage rates, an increase in the cost of production would actually reduce supply. But in this case, we have an increase in supply. So that would not be correct. And then an increase in the real wage rates, that has to do with the long run aggregate supply. And then number 13 says the monetary transmission mechanism works through the effects of changes in the money supply on. They are talking about monetary. Even if you don't understand what transmission mechanisms, a mechanism is basically a tool. So they are saying monetary tools works through the effects of changes in money supply on. They are basically asking you, Wuti, what instruments are of the monetary policy, right? And I said those instruments have to do with interest rates, they have to do with changes in the cash reserve requirement, and they have to do with changes in open market transactions. So if you check here, I have budget deficit, that has to do with fiscal policy. Interest sensitive expenditure, it has to do with interest, so monetary, yes. Government expenditure, that has to do with fiscal policy. Taxation, fiscal policy. So the correct answer would only be II, so D. Number 14 says government policies that stimulate or depress the economy as a result of a deliberate policy change are called discretionary stabilizers. So the answer would be D. So we only have two types of fiscal policies. We have automatic stabilizers and we have discretionary stabilizers. So the automatic ones are the ones that just occur without any deliberate change in policy, right? And then the discretion, if you are discretioning something, it means that you are telling people about it anyway. So discretionary stabilizers would have to do with deliberate policy change. You change the fiscal policy, change the budgets, right? And it's at a discretion of the public. So the correct answer would be discretion stabilizers, which is number D. So number 14 is D. And then number 15 says, which of the following is held constant when moving along a short run Phillips curve? So remember what the short run Phillips curve tells me. It tells me the relationship between my inflation and my unemployment, right? So if they are saying which one of the following is held constant while moving on a short run Phillips curve, it can't be unemployment, it can't be inflation, because I'm making a distinction here between long run and short run. I'm not talking about the Phillips curve per se. I'm talking about a specific Phillips curve short run, right? So remember the definition of short run Phillips curve. It is the relationship between my unemployment rates as well as my inflation rate, while keeping the expected inflation rate constant, right? So the correct answer would be D. We can't talk about unemployment rate, we can't talk about inflation, and we can't talk about the growth rate of the quantity of money. So the correct answer would be the expected inflation rate, number D, right? And then number 16 says, in the figure below, which one of the following will cause the short-run Phillips curve to shift from SRPC1 to SRPC2 while leaving the long-run Phillips curve unchanged? So they are saying, excuse me, what would change the short-run Phillips curve, right? What would increase both the inflation and the unemployment rates? So that would be stagflation, right? And what would cause stagflation? What would cause an increase in unemployment as well as an increase in inflation? Let's see the options that they are giving me. The natural unemployment rate increases. No, the natural rate of unemployment would lead to changes in the long run Phillips curve, because remember, on the long run Phillips curve, I'm saying that I'm operating at a non-inflationary position. There's no inflation on the long run PC, because if you check, it's a vertical line. So regardless of the inflation that you are having, it is staying constant at 6. So A and B are definitely wrong. And then they say the expected inflation, the expected inflation rate decreases. That would be wrong, because the expected inflation rate is kept constant along, right? So whenever we're talking about short run, we are keeping the expected inflation rate constant. So constant means it's not decreasing, it's not increasing. So C is also false. D says the National Energy Regulator approves ESCOM's request to increase electricity tariffs. So that would increase the cost of production, meaning that there would be inflation, there would be cost push inflation, and it would make the standards of living more expensive, right? It would make those that are unemployed worse off. So it would also increase the unemployment rates. So the correct answer would be D. And besides, it was the only one left. So use what do they call it? Why am I saying cross multiplication? But like use exam strategy, right? Where you cross out what you don't think is right, and then you are left with whatever you're left with, and you choose that. Number 17 says, in the cycle theorem, both unexpected and currently expected fluctuations in aggregate demand bring fluctuations in real GDP around potential GDP. They say the Keynesian approach. No, the Keynesian approach doesn't talk about both the unexpected and expected. It talks about I totally forgot. But yeah. And then we have the new classical theory. I do remember that the new classical theory actually talks about only unexpected ones. And then we have the new Keynesian theory, which talks about both the unexpected and currently expected. So just a minute, guys. Let me remind you and myself what these theories talk about. Sorry about that. Okay, here are these theories. So the Keynesian theory is called the animal spirit theory, and it talks about investment and business confidence. Okay, investment and business confidence. The monetary theory talks about the growth rate of money. So the first one would talk about business confidence and investment. The second one would talk about the growth rate of money. The new classical one would talk about unexpected fluctuations. The new Keynesian would talk about both unexpected and expected fluctuations. So the correct one is D. Correct answer is then D. Okay, the reason why I was able to get this is because I remembered that I have two new theories. I have the new classical one and the new Keynesian one. And I didn't know that the new classical one was talking only about the unexpected one. And that means that the new Keynesian one is talking about both the unexpected and the expected ones. So the answer would be D. Correct answer is D. The number 18 says, which of the following is an example of fiscal policy? So remember, fiscal policy is about what the government does. It's not about what the South African Reserve Bank does. What the fiscal policy looks at, their instruments include taxes and government expenditure. So I'm going to look for something that has to do with directly government expenditure and taxation. So the first one says the Monetary Policy Committee reduces interest rates. No, that has to do with the monetary policy, not fiscal policy. The second one says local school board rises teachers' salaries. That has nothing to do with the government. It has to do with the school, the local school. They didn't say that the government decided to increase the salaries of teachers. They said a local school, so a specific school decided to do that. That has nothing to do with the government. And then II says ESCOM borrows 100 million to build a new plant. ESCOM is an entity on its own. It has nothing to do with the government. It might have borrowed, okay, it does have something to do with the government because it's government owned. However, them borrowing 100 million doesn't mean that they took from the economy. They might have borrowed 100 million from the South African Reserve Bank. They might have borrowed this 100 million from the National Bank, right? So they might have borrowed this 100 million abroad. Has nothing, it does not necessarily mean that this 100 million came from the government, right? So I is also wrong. And then IV says treasury has to do with the government. Those are the people that take care of our money. Treasury reduces personal income taxes. Exactly. So it's talking about taxes. So it's definitely fiscal policy. So IV is correct. So the correct answer for number 18 is B. Then number 19 says when the South African Reserve Bank purchases government securities on the open market. Remember, open market transactions are one of the instruments that the South African Reserve Bank uses under the monetary policy. So when they do that, the first option says the supply of reserves in the banking system decreases. No, we are talking about the South African Reserve Bank, not necessarily the banking system. The banking system has to do with commercial banks, mutual banks, agricultural banks, but we are specifically talking about the central bank. So remember, when you are buying something from someone, you're going to give them money and you take whatever object you are buying. So when the South African Reserve Bank purchases government securities, they are going to receive the treasury bill, right, which is basically a certificate, and they are going to give out cash. So meaning they are giving out cash, they are increasing the money base. So banks will make fewer loans. No, they will make more loans because the money base has increased. C says interest-sensitive expenditure decreases. No, interest-sensitive expenditure increases. Yes, because there's going to be more money in circulation. So people are going to want to, they can save more with the banks and increase and get the interest rates that have increased. Or you can think about it in the sense that when there's more money floating in the economy, banks are going to increase their interest rates, right? So because the South African Reserve Bank injected money into the economy by buying government securities, there's going to be more money floating into, right, the economy. And when there's a lot of money in the economy, what do? Banks increase their interest rates. So the correct answer would be D. And then question 20 says, given the scenario shown in the graph below, what would you recommend the governor of the South African Reserve Bank to do so that he meets the mandate of maintaining price stability? Remember, when you're talking about the governor of SARB, you're talking about monetary policy. So they are asking you, what would you suggest they do using the monetary instruments to stabilize price, to maintain price stability? So let's look at what is happening here. So here you have a long-run aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply, and an aggregate demand. So if you check where the aggregate demand and the short-run aggregate demand are touching, is actually less than where the long-run aggregate supply is. So meaning that your actual GDP is less than the potential one. So that means you have a recessionary gap. So what would you suggest they do when there's a recessionary gap? So remember, when there's recession, they want to expand the economy. When the economy is expanding, they want to contract the economy so that they stabilize the prices. So here I have a recession. So what should they do when there's a recession? They should put expansionary monetary policy in order to better the economy, in order to improve the economy. So I had to first identify that there's a recession gap, right? And then when there's a recession gap in the economy, what should they do? They should expand the economy, because the economy is this side, right? They need to meet it halfway so that they stabilize prices. The economy is this side, it's lessening. So what should they do? They should increase it so that they meet each other halfway, and this halfway is price stability. So when there's a recession, they will put an expansionary policy. If there's a if we are on the inflationary gap, they will contract the economy. So they put a contractionary policy, right? So what is an expansionary policy? An expansionary policy is a policy to improve the economy. How can they improve the economy? They use their instruments. What instruments do they have? Repo rates, right? Or interest rates, open market transactions, or cash reserve requirement. So to expand the economy, they can lower interest rates, right? By lowering the interest rates, what interest rate are they lowering? They're lowering the interest rate of borrowing banks' money, because remember, banks are the way in which money moves from the South African Reserve Bank to the economy, right? So they will lower the cost of borrowing banks' money, and we call that interest rates, the rate at which the South African Reserve Bank borrows the commercial bank money, the repo rates. So they will lower repo rates so that commercial banks can borrow more money from them, and once they've borrowed more money from them, they can inject it into the economy, and as thus the economy is going to improve. So they can lower the repo rates, right? So that's the first instrument they can use. The second instrument says the cash reserve requirement. On my options, I don't have it, but under the expansionary policy, they would have to reduce the reserve requirement, because think about it. If banks are keeping less with the Reserve Bank, that means there's going to be more money in circulation, which will improve the economy. And then the last instrument says open market transactions. They want to inject money into the economy. So what are they going to do? They are going to buy securities. They're going to receive that certificate and give out the cash into the economy. And as a result, you are going to have more money in the economy, and it will improve the economy. So the right answer would be A, lower the repo rates so that banks can borrow more money and the money is injected into the economy, and buy securities. When you buy securities, they give you the certificate, you give them money, so more money is injected into the economy, and together they are going to improve the economy. So the correct answer would be A. Oh, economics is a lot. Oh my god. Okay guys, I hope this helped and clarified, if not all, some of your questions. Bye guys.